A pleasant day to everyone in this class. Our group is tasked to report about the monitor model theory. So, before we dig into the report, let us first see what are the objectives. So, first is to understand the 5 objectives of the monitor model theory, and then next is explain it. So, moving forward, monitor model theory was developed by Stephen Krashen. So this theory is also called the SLA, or the second language acquisition. So when we say the second language, um, these are the languages that we learn after our first language. So we have our mother tongue, right? And then when we go to different places or different areas, we tend to encounter different people with different language. So we tend to learn and we acquire the knowledge of learning the second language. So Stephen Krashen proposed that there are 5 hypotheses in this theory, which are the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, natural order hypothesis, input, and affective filter hypothesis. So, this theory is a framework in linguistics and language education. So, it explains how an individual acquire and process second languages. So, in the next report or in the next slide, we will be explaining to you what are these 5 hypotheses.
So hello everyone, I am Reimer Cadelmo. So I am here to discuss the acquisition learning hypothesis in the monitor model, which is developed by Krashen. According to him, there are 2 independent ways to develop our linguistic skills, the acquisition and the learning. This theory is at the core of the modern language acquisition theory, and it is perhaps the most fundamental of Krashen theories on second language acquisition. So let's discuss first the acquisition. Acquisition is a subconscious process where individual is not aware. One is unaware of a process as it is happening and when the new knowledge is acquired. The acquirer general does not realize that he or she possesses any new knowledge. According to Krashen, both adults and children can subconsciously acquire language, and either written or oral language can be acquired. This kind of process is similar to the process that children undergo when learning their native language. Acquisition learning meaningful interaction in the target language, during which the acquirer is focused on meaning rather than form. So next is learning. So, what is learning? Learning is a language. It's an explicit and conscious process that results from formal or prepared situation, especially in classroom, in order to enable learners to know about the second language. Here, the formal is explicit analysis and correction of errors in a second language. New knowledge or language forms are represented consciously in the learner's mind, frequently in the form of language, rules, and grammars. And the process often involves error correction. Language learning involves formal instructions and, according to Krashen, is less effective than acquisition. So in the next slides, let's discuss and let's see the difference between the acquisition and learning language. So the first one in acquisition, the first language. It is acquired naturally during childhood, immersed in language from birth, often develops without formal instruction. On the other hand, second language, which is the learning, it is often learned later in life, and it requires formal or semi-formal instructions, may not achieve the same level of fluency as the learning acquisition, which is the first language. Two, next table is implicit and subconscious process versus explicit and conscious process. So in learning, in implicit and subconscious, in acquisition, The learning happens through exposure in real life in context. It is focusing in meaning, not rules. Example, child picks up grammar without realizing it. Next one is explicit and conscious in the learning table. It requires active and effort to study those grammars, vocabulary, and rules. It involves conscious memorization and practices. Is Next is acquisition informal. Informal because it occurs through natural interactions like at home with or with peers. No structured curriculum or explicit correction. On the other hand, informal in learning takes place in structured environments such as schools or language programs, includes exams, textbooks, and planned lessons. Next is depends on attitude. This part of the acquisition is a positive towards the language and culture enhance the process. More openness to communication is natural in acquisition. In the In the learning, which is the depends of aptitude, it is strongly influenced by aptitude, especially in focusing on grammar, memorization, and analysis. Six, which is the sixth table, is the stable order of acquisition and the simple to complex order of learning. So, first is the stable order acquisition. Language features, those sounds or grammar are acquired in predictable sequence naturally. It applies to first and second language acquisition when immersions occurs. On the other hand, simple to complex order of learning, the language learning follows a deliberate progression from basic to advanced concept. Example, from greetings, symbols to grammars, or even to syntaxes. So these are the parts of the language acquisition learning hypothesis.
The monitor hypothesis, proposed by Stephen Krashen, is a key component of his second language acquisition theory. It explained the relationship between language acquisition and language learning. Language acquisition is the subconscious, and the language learning is the conscious. The monitor hypothesis states that conscious learning acts as a monitor or editor for language use. This means that learners use their conscious knowledge of grammar rules to edit or correct their spoken or written output. Rules in language use. According to Krashen, fluency in language is primarily the result of acquisition, while learning plays a second role. Learning does not produce spontaneous language but only refines it under certain conditions. So, example, speaking. Imagine a learner is speaking English without monitor. Yesterday, I go to the market and buy some fruit. The learner uses the language fluently but makes a grammatical rule, go instead of went. With monitor. Yesterday, I went to the market and bought some fruits. The learner consciously corrects the verb form because they know the past tense rules. And example number two, writing. A student is writing a letter without monitor. I am not understand your point. Can you explain more? They write naturally but use the wrong verb form. With monitor, I do not understand your point. Could you explain further? The student uses learned grammar rules to ensure correctness. Conditions for using the monitor. The monitor can function effectively only if these three specific conditions are met. Time. The learner must have enough time to think about and apply the rules. Second, focus on form. The learner must consciously focus on the correctness of their language rather than the content or meaning. Lastly, know the rule. The learner must have an explicit understanding of the grammatical rules they are applying. So I will give you an example on this. So sample number three, conditions for the monitor. First, lead time. A student who is preparing for an essay has time to review and apply grammar rules so they can use their monitor effectively. Second, focus and form. While writing an email, the learner focuses on subjective verb agreement and avoids mistakes. Last, know the rule. If the learner knows the difference between a and an, they can apply it con- consciously while speaking or writing. In casual conversation, learners may rely more on their acquired knowledge, while in formal writing or speaking, they are likely to activate the monitor for their accuracy. So, this hypothesis underscores the idea that while learning grammar is helpful, it cannot replace the natural process of acquiring language through meaningful communication. It also explains why second language learners often make mistakes despite knowing the rules. They lack time or focus to use their monitor effectively.
So, good day, everyone. I am the reporter of this chapter, the input hypothesis. So, the input hypothesis is an acquired language in a one way only. When we are exposed to input, written or spoken language, that is comprehensible to us. Comprehensible input is the necessary but also sufficient condition for language acquisition to take a place. It requires no effort from the learner. So what does the input hypothesis imply? It is implied that it was a one way to acquire language. The input hypothesis suggests that we acquire language in one way, through exposure to comprehensible input. So what does those comprehensible input? It could be written or spoken language that is understandable to the learner, even if it contains some new vocabulary or grammatical structure. It also necessary and sufficient condition because comprehensible input is considered both necessary and sufficient for language acquisition to occur. So it means that no effort required. The learner doesn't need to actively try to learn. It's just simply to understand the input is enough. So, for example, try to imagine a beginner English learner who is exposed to a children's book written in simple English. The book uses a repetitive phrases and familiar vocabulary, making it easy to understand even with the limited English knowledge. This comprehensible input helps the learner acquire new vocabulary and grammatical structure naturally. So we learned that the essence of input hypothesis it emphasized the importance of providing learners with a rich and varied supply of language that they can understand rather than focusing solely on its explicit grammar rules or memorization.
So, greetings. I am Hamim H. Krontos, and I'm here to discuss my part of our report, which is the natural order hypothesis. The natural order hypothesis is the idea that learners acquire grammatical structures in a predictable order, regardless of their age, first language, or exposure conditions. Imagine you're learning a new language. You might start by learning simple words and phrases like hello, thank you, and my name is. You wouldn't start by trying to learn complex grammar rules like how to form the past tense or future tense of verbs. The natural order hypothesis says that everyone learns language in a similar way, following a specific order. We tend to learn the easy things first, like simple words and phrases, and then gradually move on to more complex grammar rules. It's like climbing a ladder, starting with the first rung and working your way up. This order is predictable, meaning that most people learn things in the same sequence, even if they are learning different languages or are different ages. It doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult, or if you're learning English, Spanish, or Chinese, you'll likely follow a similar path when it comes to acquiring grammar. So even though you might be exposed to all the grammar rules at once, your brain will naturally pick up the easier ones first and gradually work its way up to the more challenging ones. It's like your brain has a built-in roadmap for language learning, guiding you through the process step by step. And with that, that ends my part of the report. Now I shall now pass it on to the next one.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, sir. I am Samsi Bolonto, and I'll be the next reporter for affective filter hypothesis, which is part of Stephen Krashen's theory or monitor model theory of second language acquisition. So, the affective filter hypothesis suggests that affective variables such as motivation, anxiety, self-confidence, and attitude can either block or allow the flow of language input to the language acquisition device or LAD, which is the mental mechanism enabling language learning. In simple terms, example, if a learner is anxious, unmotivated, or lacks confidence, their affective filter is high, and they may struggle to process and learn from the language input. But if they are relaxed, motivated, and confident, the filter is low, making it easier for them to absorb and acquire the language naturally. So, again, the affective filter hypothesis highlights the importance of creating a positive emotional environment for effective language learning. And I think that's all my part. Thank you for listening.
So yeah, I guess that's Stephen Krashen's monitor model theory. No? However, let's have a recap about it, just to further your understanding about it. So Stephen Krashen's monitor model theory, no, explains how people learn a second language. However, he have 5 main ideas, which including yung acquisition learning hypothesis, monitor hypothesis, natural order hypothesis, input hypothesis, and affective filter hypothesis. Sa acquisition learning hypothesis, there are 2 ways to learn language according to him, which is yung acquisitions, or which you learn it naturally and unconsciously, like how a kid learn to speak, and the learning is, which is a conscious process, like studying how to use grammar in school. So that's the difference of it. So monitor hypothesis is that our brain has a monitor that checks and corrects our language use. No? We use it when we focus on grammar and know the rules and have time to make corrections. Number 3 is yung natural order hypothesis. However, people learn certain parts of language in a set order, no matter how they are taught. Input hypothesis is that we learn best when we get language input like hearing or reading. That is just a little more difficult than what we already understand. However, this helps us to proceed to the next level. Number 5 is, the last one is affective filter hypothesis. No? Emotions like anxiety or motivation affect how we learn if we're nervous or stressed. No? It argues that it's harder to learn when we feel certain anxiety or no motivation. In short, Krashen's believes that natural language exposure and positive emotion are more important than formal lessons when learning a new language. That's the point of it. So yeah, I believe we already did our part. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe and like. Thank you.
Sa mga migraine mo, sabi ko, yung pinaisip ko, sana magka-jowa na ako, nilagyan ko parang iyak yun. Pero, tinawanan pa rin. Saya ka na. Ang ginagawa mo sa akin si Kate. Tahulan mo lang siya.
Alam nyo girls, kami malaki, mabilis masaktan. Ano kala mo sa amin laruan? Kung tapon nyo gamitin, itapon nyo na lang.